Chapter 31. Returning Home. Virginia felt the rowboat hit the bottom of the seashore. 5 men leaped out of the boat with ropes in their hands and began pulling the boat further up the bank. Darkrai stood up and looked down at Virginia. "We are here." Virginia looked up at him through the shadow of her hood. "Time to get out," he said. "We don't have all night." Virginia stood up from the boat, and when she did, she saw thousands of soldiers of the city of Gaal standing along the seashore just 100 feet from the water's edge. But her heart did not fully begin to sink until she saw one in particular, walking from the front line of the crowd towards the middle ground. Tears began to flow. She could not hold them back any longer. I'm sorry. She felt Darkrai pick her up by her middle, setting her down on the sand of the beach. She did not even feel his hands releasing her. Her body went numb and lifeless. "Please, just be a dream, please." She felt a hand press against her back, forcing her to walk. "Come," said Darkrai. "This is almost over and done with. You can cry about it later." Virginia shrugged his hand off her back and walked forward, returning her eyes to the one standing out in the middle as 2 more figures walked out to stand on either side of him. The closer Virginia walked, the further her heart fell, and the more the tears began to flow. She was a few steps away before he reached out to her, brought her head to his chest, wrapped his arms around her, and held her close. She cried out in tormenting pain. "Shh," he whispered. "It's okay." "I'm sorry, Charles," she sobbed. "I'm sorry." "Sorry?" he asked. "Sorry for what?" "It was the only way I could protect you." "What do you mean?" "Are you the leader of this city?" asked Narumel's servant. "We are 2 of them," said a voice beside Virginia. She looked up and saw her Uncle Andrew and Daniel standing on either side of her and Charles. "My name is Gavariel," said the servant, "the royal servant of Lord Narumel. I have a message from my lord that I was bidden to show and read aloud for you to hear." Virginia looked out of the corner of her eye and saw the servant unroll the parchment in his hands. She closed her eyes and sank her face into Charles's chest. "I'm sorry." "A parchment of agreement between Cohen and his lordship, Narumel." Gavariel began to read aloud. "All attacks upon Cohen and those holding her in safety shall be thus forth prohibited if she agrees to the request of his lordship, Narumel, and that of her highness, Aniatha of Skal Galmudretz, and Darkrai of the woods of Earth Stars. Cohen shall return to Earth and shall never again return to Alaythia or to the region of her world called Mason, under penalty of death." Gavariel held the black dagger up before continuing to read. "Should any attacks be placed upon her by any of the regions of Skal Galmudretz, then the loyal subjects of Skal Galmudretz shall have full authority to pierce the heart of the Lord responsible for her attack. However, if Cohen returns to the region of Mason, or Alaythia, then the lords who sign this agreement shall have full right to execute the same judgment upon her and upon the ruler found in assisting her campaign. This is the agreement established for all Alaythia to witness and uphold." Andrew reached out and took the parchment, reading over it. He looked at Daniel, passing it off to him. Daniel pulled out his bifocals and held them over his face as he read each line of the parchment, taking particular notice of the signature signed at the bottom. Silence filled the beach like a graveyard. Only the sound of the wind and the crashing of the waves echoed in the soundless scene. "It has been signed by Virginia herself," said Gavariel. "No," Daniel struggled. "It was signed by Cohen herself. And if this is Cohen's wish, then the city will respect it." Virginia listened to how hard Daniel had to force himself to say those words. She moved her head upon Charles's chest. "Please respond. Say something, anything." She heard nothing, but felt his arms wrapped stronger around her, into which she sank and cried more. "She will leave Alaythia tonight," said Gavariel. "If she does not leave by sunrise, then my master will order the attacks upon the city to continue." "By sunrise?" asked Andrew. "Yes," said Gavariel, "and I will need to be present at her departure as a witness for my master." "One moment while we speak with Cohen," said Andrew. "Of course," said Gavariel. "After all, you have until sunrise." Andrew motioned for Charles and Virginia to part, allowing him to look at his niece. Virginia kept her focus on the ground, unable to look her uncle or any of them in the eye. "Virginia," said Andrew, "what happened? Did they make you sign this?" Virginia shook her head. "Well then, what happened, honey?" Virginia shook her head and her hands. "I don't want to talk about it here. I just want to leave. But why, honey? You can tell me. What happened?" Her tears began to fall more. Her face began to turn red with emotion. Please, please just stop asking me that. I can't talk about it now. I can't. I just want to go home. I have to. It's safer for everyone. Please, Uncle Andrew, please. Andrew looked up at Daniel, looking for an alternative suggestion, but Daniel only gave a nod of his head. Andrew brushed Virginia's hair behind her ear. All right, honey. All right.
Hey everyone, we'll get right back to the episode in just a minute, but first, I wanted to talk to you about early access. You may have noticed those chapters with the locks beside them in your episode feed. Those episodes are the ones available for our early access members. While every episode is released on Thursdays with ads, early access members can enjoy the episodes on Sunday ad-free, ahead of everybody else, for only $5 a month. Not only this, but your $5 contribution to the show helps with supporting the channel and the podcast creation of book number 2. Click the link in the show notes below and join early access benefits while also supporting the channel. And now, back to the episode.
Andrew, Daniel, Virginia, and Charles all stood in the center of the courtyard with the stone arch before them. Behind them stood Gavariel and Darkrai and his men. Encompassing the whole courtyard were all the citizens of Gaal, both soldier and civilian alike. Daniel held a 30-foot rod in his hands with a wick at the end. He lifted the staff into the air, placing the wick in the center lantern at the top of the arch. He brought the staff down again, carrying a flickering flame at its tip. He placed the fire into the lantern on the right side of the arch, kindling its candle. He passed the staff to another elder, who carried the flame to the other side of the arch, lighting its final lantern. Bright lights like tiny stars appeared in the center of the arch. They began to swirl in the entryway faster and faster, all meeting in the center like a united star, until suddenly they vanished from sight. A brief moment passed before suddenly the entry of the arch burst into a wave of swirling fire before dissolving into a white light, glowing so brilliantly that you could almost hear it sing. Both elders stood on either side of the arch and stared sorrowfully at the three in the center of the courtyard. Virginia stared at the light of the portal with peace and remorse. I'm doing the right thing, right? She looked at all the men, women, and children surrounding the courtyard. You have my word, echoed Narumel's warning in her mind. She shook her head and stared at the ground. Honey, asked Andrew, placing his hand on her shoulder, are you okay? She nodded her head and looked up. The ocean began to glow red as the dawn slowly began to bleed behind them over the mountain region. Are you ready? Asked Andrew. She nodded her head and took her first step toward the portal. Wait! Shouted two obnoxious voices from the crowd. Wait, hold on, we're coming, hold on. Practically tumbling out of the crowds of people came Tristan and Nathaniel. Virginia's sobbing face turned into comical laughter as she saw both guys running up to her. Hey, they both said together. Is it true that you're leaving? Asked Nathaniel. With recovering laughter and faint tears still in her eyes, she nodded. Yes, I'm sorry. Oh, they said. Well, did you think that you could just leave without saying goodbye to us? Teased Tristan. After all, you're one of the gang. Even Soaring Eagle never leaves here without his goodbye hug from me, said Nathaniel. Virginia laughed and cried. She opened up her arms. Nathaniel swooped her into his big arms, spun her around, and laughed like a big kid before placing her back on the ground. Remember, no matter what, Oral Muti is your strength, so be strong. Virginia gave him a thumbs up. Yeah. She looked at Tristan. He smiled back at her. Taking the end of his sleeve, he wiped away the tears on her cheeks. You don't have to be blind to see those beauty glistens running down your face, he said. Virginia laughed and cried again. Thank you. Tristan and Nathaniel leaned in closer. So listen to this, whispered Tristan. Nathaniel and I are planning to take over a pirate ship soon. Actually, Soaring Eagle, Nathaniel and I have been planning this for a long time. And if you return sometime in the near future, Nathaniel and I have agreed to make you captain. I'm sure Soaring Eagle will not be opposed to it. Virginia looked at both of them, smiled, and cried. She said nothing but wrapped her arms around them. So does that mean you'll be our captain? Asked Nathaniel. Virginia looked over her shoulders and saw the horizon begin to shine brighter over the mountains. "I have to go," she said, releasing them. "I'm sorry." "Okay," said Nathaniel. "That offer still stands," said Tristan, "no matter what." She wiped her tears away and waved them goodbye. "You guys will always be the best." "We have to hurry," said Andrew. "I'll go first," said Charles. Virginia looked up and saw Charles walking towards the portal of light. Nathaniel quickly came over and gave him a hug, along with Tristan. He hugged them back. "We'll be waiting on you, brother," they shouted. Charles pointed his finger at them and smiled. Turning around to face the portal, he took one big step through the light and was gone before their eyes. Virginia turned her head and saw the light of dawn growing brighter behind her. She walked to the portal light but stopped before stepping through and looked at Daniel to her right. "Daniel," she said. He looked at her and smiled with tears soaking his eyes. "Yes, Your Highness." She extended her hand for him to shake. "Thank you for everything that you've taught me. It has meant more than you could ever know." He shook her hand and bowed his head to her. "My pleasure, Your Highness." Virginia felt the dawn's warmth hitting the back of her head. She turned her head and saw the tip of the sun breaking over the edge of the mountains. "Time's up." She looked one last time at Tristan, Nathaniel, Daniel, and all the citizens around her as dawn's light splashed against their faces. She turned her face to the arch's glowing entrance, took a deep, tearful breath, and stepped into the light. She breathed deeply, taking in the autumn smell. A cool breeze hit her back and flew around her body. She could hear the birds chirping at one another. She opened her eyes as if from a deep sleep. She was wearing Charles's leather jacket that he had given her, and the outfit she had worn the day of the school shooting, along with her hiking boots, which were caked in dirt and the mud of Alaythia. The autumn trees of the woods surrounded her, and the hills were covered in a blanket of fallen leaves. Wearing only his hiking boots and blue jeans, Charles stood facing the opposite direction, staring through the thicket of trees into the distant light of dawn. It was then that she remembered his shirt had been wrapped around her wounded leg to stop her bleeding. She stared at his back. "Please, turn and look at me. Please say something to me." A flash of light exploded behind Virginia and then vanished in an instant. She turned around and saw her uncle standing behind her, wearing camouflage pants, shirt, jacket, and hiking boots. Behind him was not an arch or a portal, just an abstract piece of the forest, like the rest of her surroundings. "Where's the gate?" she asked. Andrew looked behind him and then back at Virginia. "There is no gate at this place, honey." "What? But how do people get back in?" Andrew brushed his foot across the ground where he stood, sweeping away the leaves and forest debris. He took a few steps back and motioned to the earth. "Here's a piece," he said wistfully. Virginia stood beside him and looked down. Mingled with the dirt and leaves rested the fallen remains of a chiseled voicer stone. She wiped her eyes and sniffed. "What is this?" "The remains of the stone arch on this side of Alaythia. The stone gate we came through only leads people out of Alaythia. As of now, no stone gate on this side leads straight to the city. That's why the tree gates are so important." Virginia squinted her eyes, holding back her tears. She walked past her uncle and reached out her hand into the atmosphere, touching the air with her fingers. She could almost feel the portal on the other side soaking her hand with its warm, glowing light. Unable to handle it any longer, she fell to her knees and began to cry. She heard her uncle kneel beside her and felt his hand rest on her shoulder and rub her back. "Honey," he said softly, "listen, this isn't the end. There is still hope." "Hope?" she questioned. "How is there hope? I just made a deal with the devil of Alaythia, or at least to one of his demons." Andrew did not say a word, but just continued to rub her back, loving on her and letting her cry. "Come along, dear one," he said, picking her up. "Let's go. The house isn't too far from here." Virginia got up and wiped her tears away, looking one last time at the invisible portal that she knew stood before her. She turned away and leaned against her uncle's side. He wrapped his arm around her and they began to walk. "Charles," said Andrew, "are you coming?" Charles kept his focus on the rising sun through the distant trees, his back facing them. "I'll catch up." Virginia stared at him again. "Please, say something to me. Look at me." "Very well," said Andrew, taking off his jacket. "Take this." Charles took Andrew's jacket and slung it on. "Don't linger too long, lad," said Andrew. Virginia walked beside her uncle as he led them through the woods. She looked over her shoulder at Charles, who was still staring in the opposite direction. "Please, show me you know I'm here. Look at me." After at least a half-hour hike, Virginia found herself walking into a meadow and up a hill. The grass was brown, tall, and swayed in the chilling wind. Virginia pulled the leather jacket over her shoulders and unfolded the collar over the back of her neck. The sun was rising higher in the sky in front of them, chasing away the night, but unable to banish the heavy weight pressing against her heart. Andrew still held her close, rubbing her arm. She could not stop looking behind. Every few minutes she would turn her head to see if Charles was behind them. "Where are we?" she asked. "We are actually on our property, honey," said Andrew. "Where is the house?" As they cleared the top of the hill, Andrew pointed to a white house stationed a few hundred yards away. "Right there." Virginia could see the house with the sun climbing over the tops of the trees behind it. Not too far down below the end of the hill upon which they stood was the farthest reach of the fence for the cows. She traced her eyes to her left, following the fence line before it bent into a corner and ran alongside the edge of the woods, eventually connecting to the red barn far in the distance. She stared at the scene for a minute before turning her head back and finding Charles walking out of the woods. She left her eyes on him, hoping he would raise his head to meet hers. "I've let him down, Uncle Andrew," she said. Andrew looked behind them at Charles walking up the hill. "It's not what you think, honey." He pressed her to walk on. "Come, let's keep moving." "Well, then what is it?" she asked. "He hasn't even looked at me since we left Alaythia. Don't tell me I haven't disappointed him. I know I have." "Honey, it's not what you think. Just keep moving for this moment and be wise for the next moment." Andrew opened the back door and let Virginia inside. She stepped onto the old kitchen tile floor, feeling its tangibility through her shoes. "I'm here. I'm alive." She looked back and saw Charles walking through the fence gate, closing it behind him. "Am I?" She watched as he walked to the far side of the house where the cars were parked. "Charles's truck is still at the school," said Andrew. "I need to give him a ride into town to get it." Virginia walked up to her uncle. "Can I come? I need to talk with him." Andrew held out his hands. "No, honey, not now. Give it a day." She turned her head and looked out the window, unsure if her tears would return or not. "But why? What is wrong? You said I didn't disappoint him." "I say I have. What am I supposed to believe?" She felt Andrew's hand softly grab the side of her shoulders. "Virginia," he said, "you haven't." She shook off his hands. "Then what have I done? Huh? Honey, you've done nothing." The dam holding the reserve of her emotions collapsed, unleashing a flood of tears from her eyes and remorse in her broken voice. "Nothing? Nothing. People back in that land told me that I was absolutely nothing but hope to them. Hope. And now look. Did you see their faces?" She pointed through the window. "Can you see his face? I've killed their hope." Andrew took a deep breath and lowered his shoulders. "Virginia, we have all been hoping and waiting for years. Those before us hoped and waited for all their lives, and those before them in the same. And no matter what, we will still continue to hope. No matter your choice, there will always be hope, because the prophecy will be fulfilled. The answer is, what if it is you? What if you were created for such a time as this?" Virginia turned around and threw her hands up into the air. "That's just it. How do I know? How could I have known? How does anyone know?" Andrew drew a deep breath. "Virginia, the only way someone can ever have the final answer to a question like that is when they are faced with a choice." She stared at her uncle with her reddening eyes. "Then that settles it, 'cause I've already made my choice." "But was it the choice of your heart, dear one?" She stood there silent. "It was my choice. But was it the choice of your heart?" Virginia stood motionless. "What if you had the chance to undo what was done? Would you do it?" asked Andrew. "What if you were given the chance to return to Alaythia?" You know what will happen to me if I do. Can you promise me that the dagger mentioned in that contract will not be plunged through my heart? Can you promise that I'll be safe?" Andrew shook his head. "No, I cannot. But if you do return, I cannot begin to tell you the number of reserved forces you have not even seen that will rise to fight for you." A faint light of hope sparked inside Virginia as she looked outside toward the horizon, watching as the light of dawn began to flood its rays across the land. "What say you, Virginia?" asked Andrew. Virginia lowered her head, crossed her arms, and walked towards the stairs. "I've made my choice." Andrew walked after her. "Virginia, please, listen to me. There is so much that you have not seen, so much yet to come. Narumel fears this. He doesn't want you to know that you can defeat him. He doesn't want you to know what you are capable of." Virginia took off in a full sprint and dashed up the stairs toward her room. "I've made my choice. Leave me alone." She ran into her room and slammed the door behind her. Her tears began to cascade down her cheeks again. She took off her backpack and opened it up. Inside, she found her school books and other items that had disappeared once she stepped into Alaythia. She reached in, digging her hand around the bottom until she pulled out her cell phone. She cried harder as she stared at it. She unlocked it and scrolled through her contacts until she found the one she had been looking for. She opened its information page and tapped the number on her screen. Sitting on the bed, she pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapped her arm around her legs, and held the phone to her ear as it rang. "Aunt Elizabeth," she said, wiping her tears away. "Hey, it's Virginia. Where are you?"
This is the end of Chapter 31. Tune in next Thursday for Chapter 32. If you'd like to listen to the next chapter ad-free ahead of everyone else, then subscribe to Early Access and tune in on Sunday. If you like what you heard, please like and subscribe and share with your friends and family. It really helps the show. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all major podcasting platforms. What Shines with the Dawn was written and created by C. Taylor Eason. Copyright Christian Taylor Eason, 2024.